y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to what is a slightly, very fairly embarrassing video. When I did my most and least used makeup of 2019, several of y'all were like, hey, why don't you do just like or I think I asked, I was all like, would you guys like to see like just the least used makeup in my collection? And a bunch of y'all were like, yeah, do that video. So I sat down and I got to thinking about, okay, what are products by least used in my collection just straight up is different than my least used of 2019? Because my least used of 2019 was like, yeah, you think about using it and you occasionally pull it out and whatever. This is stuff that I just straight up don't use. It just sits there collecting dust, getting older, getting ready to expire, that for some reason I hold on to it for maybe that teeny tiny glimpse in the future that I hope I am gonna use it, or for some other stupid sentimental reason for not decluttering it. And this is a little bit horrifying because going through the products, as someone who beats the face on a regular, I like to think that I'm pretty good with rotating my makeup, being like, oh, well, I need to use this and I need to use this, and kind of cycling through what I have. Well, apparently I'm not, because some of these products have been sitting in my collection amidst all the other things I use, and some of these I haven't used in at least over a year. That is a year of it sitting there not being touched. And that's the problem. I'm gonna tell you right now, that is a problem, and I'm kind of wanting to film this video to kind of like bring myself to the forefront to be like, you haven't touched this in a year. Is there a reason why? Is the formula not something you like? Is the color story not something you're reaching for? What is that reasoning behind you not reaching for this shiz? So we're just gonna get a little bit real and we're gonna talk about the least used makeup in my entire collection. We're gonna talk about something that is actually a relatively recent purchase of mine. I believe it was 2 years ago, but when Voss released those little mini fun-sized palettes, I reviewed those and I gave them a fairly a good review. I was like, these are good for someone who's on more of a budget, for someone who doesn't, want an excessive amount of makeup. I was like, yeah, sure, go in, buy these. I'll be real with y'all, I haven't touched them since filming that review. So that was released, 2 years ago? And I've used them once in 2 years. That's pretty bad. I mean, I feel like sometimes it's hard to be honest with yourself and being like, okay, well, what do I use and what don't I use? And then when you sit down and think of that cold, hard reality of like, yeah, I recommended this, I said this was good, and it's something that I haven't even used twice. That definitely makes me think and makes me want to think a lot harder about the stuff that I'm purchasing and putting into my collection, rather than just be buying willy-nilly left and right and then never using it again. And then speaking of like never using again, this is an all-encompassing category except for one, but any Morphe palettes, save it be the original Jaclyn Hill palette. I had the 15A and the 15B, and I had the Bright palette, and I had the 35OM and the 35OS, and the Jaclyn Hill Vault. And those palettes are the epitome of just sitting there. I mean, I don't know if it's my own personal resentment against Morphe or whatnot, but I was just like, just sitting there thinking about it, being like, I never reach for these palettes. Like, there are palettes that I absolutely hate that I would reach for over any of these Morphe palettes. Now, I know that Morphe doesn't have a formula that I'm like hideously in love with, but they got the job done and they weren't like incredibly offensive, but I just did not reach for any of them. I had the Brights one, and like I said, all the ones that I had, and they just sat there. And for the longest time, I just kept holding on to them, being like, well, you got these. They're good for traveling. They're good for doing other people's makeup. They've got a crap ton of shades in them. And I just recently had to come to terms with myself and be like, you gotta get rid of this because you ain't using it. And that at least was a case of feeling a little bit less guilty and being able to come to terms with myself that, you know, I'm not a Morphe girl. Y'all ain't ever gonna see a use my code with Morphe. I ain't ever gonna get no famous influencer collab with Morphe. And I have since having that realization decluttered them because I just never reached. I bought them because I wanted to be in the hype. I wanted to be on that train. I wanted to get on that bandwagon about how good Morphe is. But now we have since jumped from that train, and I'm actually very happy about that. Okay, here's another one that's like kind of like painful, because when you have your palettes and you have your items and you're like I said, you hope you buy them and you're like, okay, all right, you know, and then you have to have like the how much money per wear, you know, the more you use it, the more, you know, the less money it is per use. But Anastasia, they released their Sultry palette. I reviewed it, and once again, I have not put that palette to my face since reviewing it. And that was that this year? Or no, 2019 or 2018? It's been at least a year. So it's been a year since I've had this palette. And like I said, I reviewed it. I used it a couple of times on my facey face. And then after the review, it just kind of went into the drawer with all the other Anastasia palettes and just isn't getting used. What kills me is it's a nice palette. It's nice quality. You know, it skews a bit more neutral than I really prefer, but I feel like this palette was done before Anastasia's inconsistent quality really had taken a full grip on the company. And so even though I'm not the biggest neutral lover, I can look at that palette and be like, I'm really sorry I don't use you because you're so nice. And I got you and I reviewed you, and then you literally just sit there. And I know through declutters, you go through and you're like, well, I can't declutter it because it's an Anastasia palette and I collect them. But I'm getting to the point where I'm like, you know, collecting them, okay, whatever, but what's the point in having it if you ain't using it? You know, kind of like that whole, you know, in merchandise and stuff like that, you know, with makeup, you know, having it as a collector's item and whatever, but I'm like, but it's makeup. It's not a knick-knack. It's not a tchotchke. You know, it's makeup. And so if I'm not getting use out of it as makeup, what's the point? Okay, this one is really, really bad, because for this video, I literally had to sit down and think and delve into the depths of my mind, delve into the depths of my collection, and really think about what I used on a regular basis, what is something that I kind of occasionally use, and what's something that I never touch. And that's fine and good, but what really started hitting was thinking and remembering how long it's been since I've touched something, because then you start getting into wasted money, you start getting into wasted space, you start getting into things going bad, expiration dates. And one thing is the Milani Rose blushes, which is a very OG on YouTube. A lot of people have them, a lot of people love them. You know, I had them, I had been using them and all, like whatever, and then as my blush collection sort of blossomed, no pun intended, you know, there were other things that I was reaching for more, like Too Faced, from, you know, Lottie London, from just a myriad of other brands and other blush formulas that I ended up liking more. And I kind of hate to say it, but there are some of my Milani Rose blushes that I probably haven't even like that I haven't used in probably bordering on the 3-year mark. Like, they're literally, like I keep saying, just sitting there with the rest of them, being all kinds of happy because I got a whole collection of them and I have anxiety about separating the family. But they're literally just sitting in there taking up space because I know there are shades that I just haven't touched. I just haven't touched for so long. And that really makes you stop and think not only about that product in and of itself, but how much makeup you have and how absurd it can be, because you got one face. You got two cheeks, well, two cheeks, but strictly speaking, you're using the same color on both of them. And, the unrealism of, like, how the turnover goes. It's like, if you have so much and you're turning it over, and that's great and everything, but when you have that amount, even, you got too much to rotate it adequately. And so even if you like the formula of something, or even if you have the best intentions, sometimes that just goes off because you just got so much. Then something that's a little bit less offensive, that's a little bit less like, I haven't touched it in 50 million years. But the Becca blushes. Now, my main reason for not really reaching for the Becca blushes, as much as I love them, as I love the finish they give my skin, how pretty they look, they are a heckin' pigmented blush. We are talking like pressed pigment eyeshadow pigmentation levels, which is great when you're trying to get all kinds of whatever on your eyes, but when you just want like a nice subtle flush of color, and you've got like just these bright, beautiful colors that you tap your brush in once and there's like a streak. They are a very intimidating formula. They look beautiful on the skin. They're gorgeous. They're stunning, but that level of pigmentation leaves so much room for error and for blush to go horribly wrong that I'm just less likely to pick it up, because I'm like, okay, well, I could do this and, have enough pigment to get it all at once, or I could choose one of the Too-Faced ones where I can gradually build it up and have more control of how much color I'm putting on my face. So the formula is great, the colors are beautiful, but it's just something that I'm like, color-loving Soraya is a little bit intimidated by, just because there's so much color to work with. It's just so intense. So those are obviously blushes that I need to try to kind of develop my own technique on how to use them to kind of make that formula less frightening to me. But they're definitely something that I look at and they make me so happy that I have in my collection. Whenever I use them, they're beautiful, but I don't use them because they're just really intimidating. Okay, this is another really embarrassing one. Basically, it's just a lot of embarrassment focusing around how much, or emphasis on how little I've used something that stays in my collection. Lorac! You all know I'm a big fan of their eyeshadow formula. I have purchased and reviewed several of their Mega Pro palettes. I've reviewed at least 2 of them. Whatever reviews I can find, I will leave down below. Y'all can have a nice little flashback moment. But these palettes that were these like majorly super coveted, sought after palettes that kind of saw themselves out, I don't reach for them. I don't think ever. Once again, it's a case of I've reviewed it and then it just sits there being a happy part of the collection, but not actually being used. And I'm not sure if it's because, my style has changed. I'm a lot less of a neutral person. I don't see myself getting a lot of use out of it in the way that I would like my makeup to be. I don't know if it's because they're huge and they're kind of intimidating and it's a lot to work with, but they just, once again, they sit there, and it's kind of like with the Anastasia, even though I don't use it, even though I'm coming to terms with the fact that I don't use it, for some reason, it still just sits there with all of the others, and all the others make me happy, and having the collection, but it's just sitting there. It's literally just sitting there. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself a lot. But 2020 for me is going to be very eye-opening, very, soul-searching, and really kind of breaking a lot of those bad makeup habits I have developed, like holding on to something that I don't use because it's not a formula I like, because it's not a color story that I'm totally obsessed with, just because of its existence or its completionist in my collection, you know, the role that it plays in my collection rather than the role it plays for my actual makeup. Okay, then one, Jeffree Star. His first palette, the Beauty Killer palette. It has some beautiful shades in it. It was his first thing to do. Everybody lost their minds. I had a little pity pat moment because I don't know if y'all know, but y'all will know now. The Jeffree Star that I grew up with was the Jeffree Star from MySpace and the Jeffree Star doing the music. One of his albums was called Beauty Killer, so when he named a palette Beauty Killer, I was like, I had a little fangirling moment. But as much as I, you know, am an advocate for Jeffree's formula, more so his new formula, this formula definitely wasn't what we consider to be the blood sugar, the jawbreaker, the alien, the blue blood. You know, it's not that formula. And not only that, it's a very kind of like mashy palette, you know. When he released his next one, which was the androgyny palette, that one was much more of a cohesive color story. It was very dark and earthy and grungy, whereas the Beauty Killer palette is just like, hi, I'm a pink because Jeffree, hi, I'm a blue because Jeffree, and you know, it was just all of these like single iconic shades that kind of represented who Jeffree Star was as a person, which I understand can work well for like a person's first palette because, you know, you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your mark on it. But I feel like out of all of his palettes, it is the least cohesive. It is the least, it's not as easy to use. Maybe I suck at makeup. Maybe I'm just not as creative as other people. But I found that the more palettes he's released, the more better he is at curating a color story, where this was just kind of like bleh in a palette. And I just don't reach for it. That original formula isn't my favorite. You know, the fact that the colors are just kind of like, you know, kind of just all out in left field. I should probably pull it out. I mean, all these things that I'm not using, I'm going to be pulling out. I'm going to do that makeup rotation business so I can actually sit down, tie myself to a chair, and force myself to use these things so that I can come to a conclusion within my soul about whether I'm going to keep them or not, because I am no longer trying to be about that life where I just hold on to everything for the sake of holding on to it. I am trying so hard to break my hoarder tendencies. Okay, then we have some couple things kind of like in the same vein. Y'all know that at least when it comes to my face products, I was about to say, I'm so good at rotating my face products. And then I remember, I'm like, girl, but you got Milani blushes you haven't touched in 3 years. So think about that for a moment. But two things that really stood out to me is things that just don't get used for one reason or another. One of which being the Hourglass ambient lighting something strobe powders, maybe. And I know for a fact that part of the reason, I know I picked those up kind of when I didn't know what to do with highlighter. I kind of just took it and did it all around my face. You know, I wasn't very familiar with complementing colors, what a highlight was supposed to do. I just kind of Instagrammed the shiz out of it and did it all down my nose, up in here, and all on this cheek. So my ability to use highlighter, my technique for highlighter has improved. But this formula, once again, all this stuff that I'm talking about, basically, I need to pull into a makeup roundup to really use and really finally make that decision of, am I keeping this in my collection just because, or is it a formula that I can actually jive with and I'm gonna get a lot of use out of because I like how it looks on me? And this Hourglass formula, it's more like faint and subtle, you know, very smoothly milled, very smoothly milled. But, you know, just because it's smoothly milled doesn't mean it's a good product, and it's kind of sparkly and glittery, and, you know, just, you know, there's a lot of sparkle and a lot of glitter, but not a lot of like beautiful glow from within. And I know part of me's holding on to them because they was expensive. The Hourglass is expensive. And another highlighter thing, I forget the name of this, but this was that holiday glow kit that Anastasia released 3 years ago. I mean, that's another thing the absurd thing is when you think about how long it's been since these things have been released and you've still got them in your collection and you haven't got it, you're like, why? I think it was the Ultimate Glow Kit or something like that, but a lot of people didn't like it because it seemed a lot chunkier, a lot more, you know, glitter rather than the fine, smoothly milled that we're used to seeing in the Gleam and the That Glow and the Sugar and the Aurora and the Moonchild. You know, people weren't really as down with this formula, but it was still something that I really liked. Some of the colors were absolutely beautiful, but out of all my glow kits, even like my deep dark glow kits that are obviously not for my skin tone, but I keep them because you don't want to break up the family. I'm not a home wrecker. It is definitely my least used one. And like I said, I just have to figure out how to come to terms with like, okay, if it's your least used one and you're literally not using it, why do you still have it? You know, this thing, it doesn't pay my bills. It doesn't pay my rent. It doesn't put my makeup on. You know, it doesn't love me. You know, what is it that's keeping me holding on to this thing, thinking maybe at some point in a glimpse in the future, there's going to be this one specific look that is going to call for that palette. When in reality, if the look hasn't happened and we haven't had to call for that palette for 2 years, I don't think it's gonna happen. Okay, then another palette. I actually have, this is where it gets so bad. This is an eyeshadow palette, and I had come to terms, okay, we're talking about the Too Faced chocolate bars, just straight up, and I had come to terms with the original and the semi-sweet. I was like, I don't use these. Too Faced doesn't have one of my end-all be-all formulas, so those have been decluttered. And then there is the Too Faced chocolate bonbons one, which is the really pretty pink, and the little the eyeshadow pans are shaped like hearts, and I'm like, aww. And it may be slightly sentimental because the bonbons palette came out real close to the time that I started having my insurgence into makeup, and so I don't know if there's a sense of sentimentality there, or if I'm desperately hoping to fall in love with the Too Faced formula again, or to, you know, get some use out of this thing, because in all honesty, when I bought a lot of my first palettes, we're talking Naked palettes, Chocolate Bar, the Lorac Pros, you know, a lot of those, you know, staple standard palettes in people's collections, I wouldn't say I didn't know how to do makeup, but I'm not as skilled, I wasn't as skilled or as aware, or, you know, I know a lot more about how to do makeup now than I did then. So a part of me is like, well, you know, here's my chance to actually, you know how to use this stuff. You know, now that we're here, we've made it this far, I owe it to these things to at least try to use them in the way in which they were meant to be used. But it's like, you know, and the other problem is the thing that always gets me is you're going through these palettes and you see that one shade and you're like swatchy, and you're like, wow, that would be bomb diggity. Even though you haven't used that bomb diggity shade in a couple of years in any of the looks, because you have the ones that you reach for all the time. It can't just be me, or am I just some weird makeup anomaly that just, I don't know. I find that I'm getting frustrated with myself because I do have so many of these products that I'm just like, just use them. Just use them. It shouldn't be that hard. It's not that complicated. It's eyeshadow. Literally take a brush, get some eyeshadow, and put it on your face. But like, you know, you still have that, you know, you reach for the things you know and love. You know, I just recently got some neutral ColourPop palettes. Those are the only neutrals that I reach for because I absolutely adore the ColourPop formula. And the Too Faced Bonbon palettes gets left out in the cold with one beautiful, amazing shimmer that I may or may not use at some point someday. I just really need to take stock of what I'm using, what I love, what I like, and it's taken me years to figure it out. But when you sit down and really think things through, it's a bit eye-opening. So in the continuation of 2020, we're gonna have some some cold, hard truths coming up all in here, and I'm kind of excited, kind of scared, but I'm kind of ready for that next step in my makeup evolution. But that is what I have today for my least used makeup. I actually have a couple other products. I mean, obviously, when you have a collection that's as big as mine, there's gonna be a lot of products that just don't get the love they deserve. If you would like to see a second part to this, even though strictly speaking this is a second part, if you want to see another installment of this kind of video, let me know down below. I also plan on doing my most used makeup, you know, to kind of really sit down and think, what do I really use, what am I really drawn toward versus what I'm not, to kind of, like I said, mentally prepare myself for the natural selection of decluttering. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!